Something provocative a little bit, perhaps, something a bit unusual, and I'd like to get your permission in advance to do it, without telling you what it is.
I told you it'd be fun.
We are talking about addictions tonight, addictions of all kinds, and new research has been done about addictions, and some of the practices and methodologies that are out there, and which ones work and which ones don't, and how do we know, and it's a complicated, multifaceted issue. So here's how I'd like to start. Everybody who has a device, pull it out and hold it up above your head. You can probably figure out where I'm going with this. And so here's the deal. When I ask you to do this next thing, you are perfectly within your rights to be angry with me for 30 seconds, and then you're not allowed to be angry with me anymore. Okay, deal?
Yeah.
Come and put your device up on the table. Hey, listen, do you hear the angst and the moaning and wailing? To be asked to surrender the device for, what, 45 minutes? Will cause no end of disruption.
So much for not being filmed.
Okay, now when you put your device up here and when you go and sit back down naked of the device, what do you notice about yourself? Preoccupied with the fact that you're missing. Dale, you're missing something really important that's going on here. Some people feel freed. Some people feel more anxious. What else do you notice? Worry, anxiety, a kind of emotional tension that occupies us during this period of enforced absence. Okay, more than 30 seconds has gone by now, and you can't be mad at me anymore for this. I'm going to give you your devices back in about an hour. If you have a panic attack between now and then, because you don't have your device, then by all means, come and get your device if you need to. But notice how easily and seamlessly and quickly we all fall into this space of being, let's call it, addicted to our devices. We've been really hesitant to make this leap. We've tended to make a division between substance addictions or perhaps behavioral addictions like gambling or pornography. We've tended to draw a line somewhere, an artificial line that says, well, this kind of stuff, it might be addictive, and we might be somewhat addicted, but it's a different kind of deal. And that's a really important thing to question, because one of the things that's become very clear over the last few years is that there's a continuum of addiction, and that it's not like an on or off kind of deal. And so many of us now have very clear addictions to our devices. Our devices are the last things we see at night before we go to bed. Our devices are the first thing we interact with in the morning. They are our gateway to our friends and our communities and our work for some of us. And many of us have the experience of phantom vibrational thigh sensations when we're without our devices. Some of you in this room tonight will experience this, I guarantee it. You'll feel a vibration in your hip, you're like, wait a minute, I don't even have, do I have another one? And it'll be up here. There's a very deep set of nervous system responses that happens here that we have immediate access to because we live in this culture. So when we think about addiction as a topic for counselors who are working with clients, these days we should also be thinking about ourselves and the relationships we have particularly with devices and particularly the web. Now that most of us spend more time in front of screens than sleeping, when you add in the device time, plus the working on the computer time, plus the watching the evil of Netflix time. I mean, now you can go back and you can start at the first episode of Doctor Who, and you can watch all 4,300 episodes, right? I'm working with somebody now who's done this 3 times, right? We added it up, it's roughly 450 hours to watch Doctor Who all the way through, and she's done it 3 times. So that's like a year of work, right? Just to do that. As you'd expect, more young people fall into this category than older people, but like with all addictions, nobody is particularly immune. My mother-in-law would be chagrined to hear me say this, but she probably plays solitaire 6 hours a day, right? That's what she does. And she doesn't even do it properly. She still reaches over. Oh, it's crazy. So this whole world of addiction is getting bigger, actually. As we start to see this wholesale migration from substance abuse, which is illegal typically, and which you have to pay money for, and which you have to leave your house for, typically. Now we have addictions right in our pocket. And we have addictions at home for young people, especially with gaming. So we're starting to see this kind of migration outward toward digital addictions, which will largely supplant substance addictions over the next few years for most young people, with the exception of marijuana, which is being paired with gaming. So here's what I want to do tonight. I'm not going to do a thing where I stand up here and read from a PowerPoint. I would like to make this as experiential as possible and contributory as much as possible so that I hear from you about the kinds of things we should talk about in the next hour. And I want to leave time for questions, too. So if we have till 8:30, then that gives us from now about 15 minutes for me to yak. And then some time for questions. And let's see how far we can get in that space. But before I kind of dive in with my own thoughts, one of which is to talk about marijuana, the big elephant in our room in BC. Why'd you come? What do you want to hear about? What made you show up tonight?
Gaming.
Gaming. What else?
Harm reduction in 12 steps.
Yeah, and where we're going with that.
Yeah.
Is that out now? Is that something that we will no longer do in the future? And the answer is probably not. You know, we'll probably keep these traditions for a while. But as the spectrum of other things comes into play, the other 90% of clients for whom this does not work ideally, as they find services and other methodologies, this will settle in as one of the many, many approaches that are available. And that migration is well underway. Some of you know me, and you know that I do a lot of clinical supervision for addictions agencies. And what's currently the largest treatment center in our city has moved away from the 12-step model, right? Which is really cool. I think it's a really positive development. And we had a very long discussion about at what point would they take down the list of the steps in the main group room? You know, when is that appropriate? It took years. It took a decade for us to make this transition. But that's something that's happening everywhere. And we should be aware of how we handle it. It's not like we want to get rid of 12-step methodologies. They have their place and their purpose, absolutely. But how do we integrate them with the other things that are coming on stream that we know about now that seem to be very effective and provide complements to the 12-step models? Okay, what else? What else did you come for?
Multiple addictions.
Yeah, which are the norm now. Okay, what else?
Relapse prevention.
Relapse prevention, or let's call it relapse management. Because you really can't prevent a relapse. Pretty much everybody's going to have a relapse. Not everybody, but almost everybody. What else?
Eating.
Eating. So this kind of newly talked about eating, pornography is, I would include in the same thing. Addictions to intensity and to the relationship between power and powerlessness in the body, and?
Social networks.
Yeah, so gaming, social media, and so on. And?
Dating sites too.
Dating and, yeah, all kinds of internet-related things. What else?
I don't have a problem.
You mean denial?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a problem. And some people who say that don't have a problem. What else?
Chaos.
Chaos? Like, as your life becomes chaotic? Through addiction? Okay.
We're just being addicted to drama and chaos.
Yeah. Addiction to drama and chaos. Yeah. Well, you know, in a way, all addictions are addiction to drama and chaos. Okay, what else?
I'd like to see us touch on codependency and enabling.
Yeah, and where are we at with that, right? How do we think about that in the new models that we have? And?
Healing.
Healing. New models, I think correctly that. Models, and what else?
I'm hoping you'll address, as a student, coming from a student perspective, the process you go through when you get a client with an addiction.
Starting. How to start. That is a very complicated question. Okay.
The one not many people answer, which is important.
Okay.
Relationship to spirituality.
Spirituality. Okay. I'm going to fill up the board pretty quickly. One more.
Disconnection.
Which is related to spirituality. Okay. Okay.
Detachment.
And detachment, disconnections, and so on. Okay. Okay, so look up on the board at these items. And you expect me to cover all this in an hour? Okay. Let's see what we can do. All right. And I will try to weave in as we go a number of bits about the new research that's been done over the last few years to change our paradigm of thinking about addictions, which has really come from a characterological place. We think of addiction still as a kind of failure of character and as somehow related to hanging out with the wrong peers or being unable to marshal resources within the personality to heal. And one of the things that has been really definitively questioned is this whole notion, and it's been replaced with another idea about how we can think about addictions in a way that's healthier. So, as I said, I'm not gonna use a kind of canned presentation with you guys tonight. What I am gonna say is that everything that we'll talk about tonight, all these kinds of things, I do have resources for them on my website, which is here, rossleck.com, like me. Okay. Let's start with where we should start, which is the relationship between adult or adolescent addictions and childhood developmental themes. One of the most interesting things that has been consistently correlated is if this is the timeline, if this is birth, that is adulthood over at the door. That sounds like a phone, isn't it? That's a serious vibrational phone. It's like, I really, pay attention to me. It sounds like a power drill. Okay, so, one of the things that many people have suggested is that we should treat and conceptualize addictions as developmental disorders. And this is a very lovely way to think about it. We've characterized so many other things as developmental disorders. That allows us to take a more nuanced and neutral point of view toward addiction, as we have with other things. So many of the adult challenges that people face psychologically, emotionally, we've rooted them all the way back, right, to very early developmental pieces. And that deal is definitively done at this point. We should all be thinking about addictions in developmental disability terms, because the correlations are so stunning and strong between early childhood developmental themes, particularly in the development of the nervous system, and adolescent vulnerability, particularly between ages 9 and 15. And the healing and growth and change that happen for people as they approach age 25, 26. If you take those ages, if you take the early developmental age 0 to 4, and you take age 9, which is where the vulnerability most accelerates, and then you take age 15, which is the point where we see the most gaming addiction, 15, 16. And then you take age 25, 26, which is the point at which the nervous system completes its developmental task, completes its architecture. These milestones match up precisely with the kinds of experiences that people go through in addiction. So we tend to find, as if you work in the downtown east side, you surely recognize that the people that have the most challenging addictions, the most multiple addictions, are always those with the most developmental trauma, right? Those that are most likely to have the experience of early childhood deprivation, poverty, abuse, neglect, and so on. And it's kind of like a one-to-one deal. And 1 out of every 1,000 people you work with as adults who have debilitating, lifelong, multiple addictions, once in a while that person says, I didn't have any childhood trauma. And that's a really unusual circumstance. It does happen. Happens to me once every 5 years or so that I meet somebody like this. And I think it's an exception that more or less proves the rule. That developmentally speaking, we get jump-started toward addictions, predisposed toward addictions in early childhood development. And then at age 9, when we go through this brain pruning process, which is very little understood. You know, we don't even know how to call it. Brain pruning happens at 2 stages in human development. One is a few weeks before birth, where the nervous system goes through this kind of pruning process where it trims back up to about 1/3 of its neural connections in preparation for birth. Nobody knows why. But if you back it up a little bit, then you think about schizophrenia and autism. The most interesting theories about causation in terms of schizophrenia and autism have to do with brain pruning. And perhaps the nervous system over prunes or under prunes. Like take autism, for example. Along that spectrum of autism, there are some kids who are hypersensitive. They hear a tiny little sound way off and they can't focus on anything else other than that sound. Right? They're overly in tune. And then there's some kids who just are unreachable in a way, or they seem to be very withdrawn. And they're perhaps under-pruned or over-pruned, right? So it's possible that the nervous system's tweaks before birth create these predispositions toward these kind of developmental disabilities. And they probably create, or surely create, the predispositions toward addiction as well. So that when we get to age 9, when brain pruning happens again in preparation for adolescence and the passageway through toward adulthood, that's also the age where most people start to pick up addictions. You know, most alcoholics start drinking around age 9, 10, maybe 11. Pretty much everybody's going to be a hardcore adult alcoholic starts at that age. More traumatized kids will start earlier, 5, 6. You know, I've worked with kids who started at, age 4, drinking, right? But that's unusual, it's atypical. Most of the time, if you work with alcoholics, you can ask them, when did you start? Say, well, 9, 10, 11, right? Mm-hmm. Occasionally somebody will start later in high school, but that's not the norm either. It's somewhere here. So it's paired. The vulnerability to addiction is paired with changes in the nervous system. They go together. And then if you come all the way down to the end here, to age 25, 26, when the nervous system kind of finishes its development and the architecture of the body is complete, that's an age where a lot of people who picked up earlier addictions stop. I mean, the biggest window for stopping using has to be 27, 28, 29 years old. Like if you work in treatment centers, you see this all the time. Something about unreadiness happens for many people in the early 20s. They figure they can get a few more years out of it. Right? But they get to 27, 28, 29, like, man, this is ridiculous. I really don't want to keep doing this for the rest of my life. And there's some kind of wisdom or insight that comes at that age, which just wasn't available even a few years earlier. And it just kicks in. And it's not due to anything that anybody says necessarily, or any group there, or any treatment. It just kind of evolves and emerges on its own. I think that's a really good example of the fact that so much of this whole landscape is really about what the nervous system is doing, not so much what our personal psychology is doing. They're connected. And I think that's maybe the most important insight that the more recent addictions research has shown, which is that our point of view about addictions treatment, which is that it should be about insight, understanding why you drink or why you use, which is an important insight. But our focus on insight, and in the counseling profession in particular, where insight is a core thing, like insight drives everything we do in the counseling world. If you work as a counselor, who works as a counselor? Okay, so think about how much insight drives what we do. We're always trying to get people to figure out why. Look deeper. Understand this. Why? Go another level down, Think more deeply. And that's really important. But it turns out with addictions, it's kind of irrelevant. That insight is not the thing. It's even deeper than insight. It turns out that what's key is not getting the insight. What's key is changing the nervous system. The more and more we study this, the more we recognize that addiction is simply a nervous system pattern that is locked. It's locked in. So for example, I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's take the alcohol example. If you think about the effect that alcohol has on the nervous system, think about when you drink, if you're a drinker, even socially. It has a very different effect than opiates have on you, right? Think about the last time you went to the dentist and had a tooth removed, or whatever, right? Opiates make you feel in a way like everything is okay. It brings you down. It brings you into a place of solace and safety and comfort and gives you a refuge from stress. Whereas alcohol kind of amps you up in a way. Even though it's a depressant, it amps you up and makes you feel like you can be confident and strong and opinionated. And you know, you go to the pub with your friends and you start talking about hockey, and you know nothing about hockey. But you have a couple of beers, and pretty soon I told those Canucks, I said, you guys got to do that. You know, you get going, and you're like, you sound like an idiot. But you think I'm strong, right? So if we were to it's kind of artificial in a way. But if we were sort of to artificially map the response that people drinking alcohol get to the nervous system branch that is associated with that, it would be the fight response. Alcohol makes you fight. It allows you to fight back better. Whereas opiates help the freeze response, right? And most of you know, I'm sure, that we have roughly, as I said, it's a bit artificial because they don't actually work this way, but the nervous system has about 4 flavors, right? Fight, flight, freeze, and orient. And that's interesting because there are about 4 kinds of addiction. And there are about 4 kinds of mental health challenge. And all of them are really about the fact that the nervous system gets out of balance with itself. And so all of our mental health problems and all of our addictions really are the same thing. They're a way for the nervous system to try to pull itself back into balance temporarily in a situation where the body's out of whack. And the body has learned to be out of whack through a long period of immersion in environments which push the nervous system out of whack. So the example I was going to give you was from drinking. People who are long-term alcoholics tend to have violence in their early childhood, especially violence around disempowerment. It's not a rule, but it's a tendency that they've had situations as kids where they were disempowered through violence. And so they grow up with this sense of kind of underlying disempowerment. And the nervous system is kind of uncertain around the fight response, uncertain whether they can use their fight response, and if so, how it will play out. And so when they drink, the nervous system comes forward with this really strong fight response, and it completes what they were unable to complete when they were kids. And so it works, right? It's a self-medication that kind of works because it spontaneously and temporarily rebalances the nervous system. And so that insight about addictions as a nervous system rebalancer is identical to the work that's been done in the area of trauma, where we recognize that trauma is also an imbalance in the nervous system. Trauma is defined as a locking of one of the responses of the nervous system into a pattern that it can't break. So then we could say that addictions are trauma also. There's no distance, no space between trauma and addictions. They're the same thing. Addictions are a kind of trauma, a kind of early developmental trauma. So all these fields that we used to keep separate, trauma, addictions, and mental health, we are increasingly starting to realize are the same thing. They're all different manifestations of exactly the same thing. And what they're manifestations of is a nervous system that's out of balance. So if there's one thing that we should start doing as professionals, it should be to change our language and start thinking about addictions, mental health, and trauma as all manifestations of the way in which the nervous system gets tweaked by our experiences. Mostly in childhood, but at other times as well. And that all of our efforts at healing should be focused on identifying how the nervous system is cracked, or out of whack, or somehow out of balance, and finding ways to restore that. And since the nervous system operates at a level that's below the consciousness most of the time, our efforts toward insight, helping people understand the why, don't get us all the way home. They don't. Right? And if we take that argument and we move it into the world of mental health, the same thing applies. Look what's happened with mental health. We now have a situation where antidepressant medications are by far, by leagues, the most prescribed medications on the planet. We have a situation where in any given year, about 25% of the people in our population are suffering from depression. About another 25% of the people are suffering from anxiety. And that doesn't include addictions and other kinds of ailments. But if you take 25 and 25, you get 50. That's half the people in this room. And then you add the addictions, that's another third of the people in this room. Remember? And you start to add it up, and pretty soon you have almost everybody captured under this kind of umbrella of mental health challenges. And if we make an argument that
It's dinner time.
Or that will keep going.
if we make an argument that both mental health and addictions and trauma are all the same thing, and we add up the number of people who are suffering from all this kind of stuff, we capture pretty much everybody, right? And that's been my experience, and probably yours too, in the world of addiction, is that most of us don't get there by accident. We get there because something happened to us, either to us personally and directly, or to someone in our family. And so our experience of mental health problems and addiction problems and trauma, our experience is very acutely personal. So we approach this with a very personal frame. And even those of us who go into this professionally to become counselors in this field, it's a difficult line to tread because we're personally influenced by this in profound ways. And professionally, we're trying to keep a kind of frame of professionalism. And that's really challenging to do. So the first thing is to recognize the unity between addictions, mental health, and trauma, and recognize them all as developmental issues. They're all developmental. And that leads to the second thing, which is that there's a period of maximal vulnerability. It is not childhood. This is kind of cool. Your childhood can suck massively, and you can still be fine if something happens here between age 9 and 15. That's cool. So you'd expect that early developmental trauma, the more serious it is, the more likely it is to predispose us or push us in the direction of having adult addictions. And that is true. But there's a blip here between 9 and 15, right after brain pruning, where it turns out that pretty much anything that happens in early childhood can be, to the nervous system, which results in a mental health problem, addiction problem, or trauma, can be worked on, resolved, helped, healed during this period. That is really cool. So I call this the mentorship magic window age, technical term. Because no end of research shows this now, that there's something unique about this age where we move out from parents and start to get connected to adults in the community, mentors in the community, who help us navigate this process. We have just the right amount of resources psychologically as individuals, as emerging individuals, that if we get the right amount of support from someone who knows what they're doing, then we can be diverted from lifelong challenges. That is the sweet spot. So it suggests a public policy initiative. If we're going to put our efforts into anything in terms of healing addictions, it should be to work with young people. Young people between 9 and 15 in particular. Now, of course, we should do what we can to reduce childhood trauma as well, right? And help people become better parents and help society be more welcoming of kids and all those kinds of stuff. But at the same time, what matters here matters less than what happens here. This is the important piece. And so when you wind it forward into adulthood, and you look at what is the point, what is the juncture in time where somebody's life started to go off the rails in a permanent way, it's always going to be between 9 and 15. The die are cast there. So this is where we should put our energy. Into prevention, promotion of health and lifestyle and mentorship and all that kind of stuff. And there are lots of such programs out there. That's interesting, though. This is the only moment this can happen. Something happens to us beyond 26 or so, where we become less and less open to the kinds of interventions that are required to help us get back on track or help us find a fundamentally new track. It becomes harder and harder and harder. As you know, you get older and other things come into play and your life gets more fossilized in a way, which is good in a way, right? You know, like you have kids. A lot of people have kids. Once you have kids, you're done. Right? That's it. Your life is spoken for. For the rest of your life is spoken for. If you want to be a good parent, that's the deal, right? You don't get to make your own choices anymore. You don't get to move to Borneo for a year. You don't get to go back to school until you're 60, right? You are spoken for. And now that the final age of move out for kids in Canada is 31, you're in it. You're in it for the long haul, right? So it gets harder, obviously, it gets harder and harder and harder to change as time goes on. So this sweet spot is really there. And we haven't really done anything to address that yet. We're still treating addictions from the end of the cycle, from this point in adulthood where people are really deeply stuck. And at that point, it's really hard to unwind. And the stats, you probably know the statistics of this, are so-called success rates are really low for adults. I don't like to use rates of success in talking about addiction, because it's not fair. It's not fair to talk about the numbers of people who successfully quit altogether all substances and go on to lead wonderfully healthy lives. That is less than 1%, right? So that's not fair. But there's the people for whom life becomes manageable. There's the people for whom life improves. That is a success. If it improves 1%, it is a success. And so I don't subscribe to models of treatment and recovery that say you will be defined as having beat your addiction when you meet the following criteria. I don't think that's true at all. I know many, many people who've gone through treatment dozens of times. And it's tough to see them again. It's tough for them to show up again. But they come, right? And something happens for them. Something meaningful happens for them. It is tough and unfair for us to say that they shouldn't come back. They should. They should come back. Okay. So, the whole landscape of addictions treatment is being influenced by this research. And it's kind of turning around a little bit, kind of pivoting our notion of how we should treat addiction. Derek is calling.
Tell him you're busy.
So, two things are happening here. You need your phone. Two things are happening here. One is that addictions are getting bigger. Bigger and bigger and bigger. They're not getting smaller. We're not making any progress. We will never be done with addictions. Ever. The human species is about 200,000 years old, maybe a bit older. And for all that period of time, we've had addictions. We'll always have addictions. It's a method. It's one method of self-medicating, spontaneously rebalancing the nervous system, and we'll never be rid of it, and we should not be rid of it. So the notion that we're going to ever arrive at a place where nobody's addicted is a mirage. It should not be a destination, in my view. But the opposite is also something to consider, which is that, okay, we're stuck with addictions, but how big should they really be? How much space should they occupy in our consciousness and in our culture? And that, by any standard you want to cite, that number's too large, way too large. And as I said earlier, it overlaps a lot with people with mental health challenges and people with trauma. So we're in this kind of weird zone where we've been trying to deal with addictions for a while, through treatment, through 12-step programs and so on. We've had precious little success with that. And the numbers are growing larger and larger and larger. And as addictions move online, they migrate into that sphere. more and more people are addicted. I do a lot of work in schools, and holy crap, the number of kids who are hardcore addicted to gaming is really shocking. So,
And could I just say
Yeah.
something about that? They know they're addicted.
yeah, they do.
I remember talking to some kids in grade 6, and they told me that they were addicted. They could not be
Yeah.
off it for a day or
That's right.
whatever.
And they have quite a bit of insight about it. They know why. They know about the driftiness of modern culture and the pressures of academic life and getting into the right university and making your parents happy and getting the latest device. They know it. Lots of insight. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference. They're still in it. It's a great example of how insight is not the magic bullet with addictions. It's just not. Okay, so the number of people is growing, it's getting worse, it's getting larger. We need a new definition of what addictions is. So here's mine. And I'll say it first, then I'll explain it. Addictions are what you do in the moment of stillness.
Say again?
Addictions are what you do in the moment of stillness. Okay. Here's how this works. The nervous system, how many people know, when I use the phrase self-regulation, how many people know what I'm talking about? Okay. Those people who've gone to counseling school know what I'm talking about. Okay. So, self-regulation is a new term for a really old idea that we used to call willpower, or self-management, or self-discipline, or many, many other fuzzy terms. But it's the ability to consciously modulate the nervous system. Okay? It's probably the most thorough exploration of this is Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Okay, so the nervous system is always searching for self-regulation. The entire momentum of childhood development and adolescent development has the singular goal of helping the person come to a place of conscious self-regulation. Self-regulation is correlated with life success more than any other single factor. More than socioeconomic status, more than education, more than anything else. Self-regulation. The ability to know and instinctively, without thinking about it too much, do the right thing in a moment that is surprising. For example, if somebody comes bursting through the door yelling right now, what do? I have 4 possibilities from the nervous system. I can fight, I can freeze, I can flee, or I can orient. The right response is probably not to fight. You do not want to punch someone who comes running in shouting, right? The right response is not to flee, to run out the other door. The right response is perhaps to freeze, like just, whoa, wait, see what's going on? And perhaps to orient, to look at that person, look at you guys, see who's reacting, figure it out, right? Probably a combination, freezing and orienting. So if I'm able to practice decent self-regulation in that moment, that's what I would do. So the self-regulation piece is always being asserted by the nervous system. When it's thwarted by trauma, when it's thwarted by addictions, or when it's thwarted by mental health challenges, it doesn't get a chance to express itself or learn or change the system. One of the things that the self-regulation mechanism does routinely is a recalibration moment where you're not engaged in any outward activity. You're not doing anything that requires the nervous system to be occupied. You're just sitting. And these are the most important moments of all for self-development. The moment of stillness, where you just sit and nothing else is happening. In those moments, the nervous system just goes, it adjusts itself. It recalibrates. It brings itself back into balance in a beautiful way. And it starts from that foundation and then moves forward. So the path toward healing is about how we work with self-regulation. This is the reason, by the way, that mindfulness works pretty well. Because mindfulness is all about the moment of stillness, right? Just being in it, basically. Whether you get that mindfulness from a meditative practice, or whether you just get it by going for a walk, or whether you get it by doing some creative activity that brings you into the moment of flow and experience, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is that you get the moment of stillness so the nervous system can recalibrate. And if you don't get the moments of recalibration, the nervous system never gets a chance tweak itself and learn and grow and heal. So the secret, if it can be said there's a secret, to addictions recovery, to mental health recovery, to trauma recovery is in the moment of stillness.
But what if the addiction provides that moment of stillness?
Yeah, and the addiction provides a temporary and artificial moment of stillness depending on the addiction, right? So the moment of stillness is absolutely key. If we either A, never get the moment of stillness, or B, if the moment of stillness is created by addiction and is a kind of zone out moment of stillness rather than a zone in, tune in moment of stillness, then we get stuck. So my definition of addiction is about what we do in the moment of stillness. It's really clear. If you're standing in the grocery lineup, which is a great moment of stillness, by the way, because, you know, when you try to go to the lineup that has the least number of people, you wait the longest. So this is life's way of saying you need a moment of stillness. You're standing there. Nothing else is going, there's nothing to do but wait, right? You're standing there. What do?
Pick up your device.
If you pick up your device and you go, I better check Facebook, whatever, then you have a technology addiction. Absolutely. No doubt about it. In that moment, alcoholics plan the next drink, right? Sex addicts think about cruising. Gambling addicts think about when they can get to the casino. The addiction pops up. It surfaces in the moment of stillness and discloses itself and takes control of the moment of stillness and tries to direct it into addictive behavior. Because the addiction is a way to artificially try to tweak and manage the nervous system. So it's your own kind of twisted way of trying to heal. So you can identify what people are addicted to and what the manifestation of the addiction is by what they do in the moment of stillness. So this is the only diagnostic criteria we actually need. You know that big multi-page form at your treatment center they use? How many times during the last week have you done XYZ? We don't need any of that kind of stuff. We don't. All we need is to know what the nervous system is doing. And the way we find out what the nervous system is doing is to ask about and be attentive to the moment of stillness. The moment where the nervous system is most on its own and just able to do its thing. Without intervention, without the need for behavior, activity, conscious planning, anything. It's just there. What does it do? Which way does it pivot in that moment? And that tells us pretty much everything we need to know. Now, of course, if you only check your cell phone once in a while when you're in the grocery lineup, that's probably okay, right? But the moment of stillness is the key. And the reason, in my view anyway, the reason that the rates of addiction and the rates of mental illness are going up is because the moments of stillness are going down. How many moments of stillness do we get in a day now? None. We get up in the morning and we check our email and voicemail, whatever, and we go to work and we work on a computer and we're busy, 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 go, go, go. We don't get moments of stillness anymore. And so many, many people are adrift. We know from a whole mountain of research that we need a lot more than we're getting. Adults need about 30 minutes a day, at least, of moments of stillness, where you're just kind of not doing anything. You can talk and share in those moments and be with people, but they're moments that are not focused on activity and achievement and tasks. Kids need an hour a day of time where they're just sitting, sharing about their day, perhaps with their family members, just doing things that aren't about achievement. And so I'm married and I have 2 children. So that's half an hour for me, half an hour for my wife, an hour for each of my 2 kids. That's 3 hours a day of conversational, slow time. Now that seems crazy in the world today. Nobody gets that amount of time. How would you possibly make that work? But if you roll the world back only a generation or 2, when families used to share meals together, that's 3 hours a day right there. Right? We get up together, we have breakfast together, we share and talk and do whatever. We go out into the day, we come back, we do the same thing at lunch, and then we do the same thing at dinner, and then we go to bed when the sun goes down. Right? That's only, what? A shiveringly small proportion of our history ago that we did this. And now we don't do it at all. And we are trying to do something that's impossible. which is to divert ourselves away from our evolution. Good luck with that. Divert ourselves away from our evolution in a couple of generations. We have been evolving this way for 6 million years. And we're not, anytime soon, going to evolve away from the kind of species that needs to sit down face to face and be together with people in moments of stillness every day for hours a day. And I think that, personally, and professionally, this is the source. This is the ultimate source of so much of the travail in the world today. Our world is that we have moved too quickly and too far. And we don't really know how to wind it back now. But it's something we should start to think about. In all the treatment programs we do for addiction, in all the support programs we have for mental health problems, and all the treatment services we provide for trauma, we should be focusing on the moment of stillness and how we achieve it, how we get there. And that's why you see things like mindfulness and walking and exercise working, right? Running in particular is a good example. Some of you know that I'm a fan of the evolutionary function of running. But what's interesting about running is that, among other things, is that once you get to the point where you can do it for more than a few minutes without dying, it delivers moments of stillness. Delivers this moment of stillness in the midst of the movement. Dance does the same thing, right? And so it spontaneously delivers this thing. And running's particularly good at it because you can't do anything else when you run other than run, right? It occupies every part of the nervous system, and yet it has this moment of stillness hidden inside of it. And it bothers me to no end when I go to the gym and I see every person on the treadmill watching goddamn television, you know, or listening to music on the machine.
Or reading.
Or reading. Stop doing that. Working with the body is about the body's expression. It's not a way to distract your mind with yet another distraction. All these things bring us into a moment of stillness, and we should be more open to that, I think, than we have been. Okay. Okay, I'm going to tick off a couple of things. Multiple addictions. Everyone's going to have a relapse. I'm just going to tick that off. Okay, so the spectrum of eating, pornography, I put them together, although they might sound separate. They're the same, right? They're about the ways in which the nervous system is cracked. Well, crack's not the right word. The nervous system is out of whack. So eating disorders is a good one. So many people have theorized what causes eating disorders, and the current prevailing view is that it is about the nervous system's attempt to control an otherwise uncontrollable situation, or a situation of deep disempowerment. I think that's a pretty good theory. So again, it's about the nervous system. It's about the notion that when our world is chaotic around us and we can't control anything, here's something we can control, right? What we put in our own bodies, or don't put in our own bodies. So it's an attempt to bring ourselves into balance, to bring ourselves into a moment of nervous system equilibrium. And of course, we get there temporarily through eating or whatever it is we do or don't do. We get there temporarily. And the temporary nature of the balance we get in the nervous system is the source of ongoing addictions. The fact that it gives us a temporary closure or a temporary balance for some prescribed period of time, an hour maybe, is the source of the fact that we keep coming back. Because we can't find that resolution in any other way. So it brings us back again and again and again. So eating disorders, all kinds of... We need to start thinking about addiction as addiction spectrum, like we've done with many other things. Addiction spectrum, it's all part of the same spectrum. We should not be calling it a disorder. Okay, let me vote. I gotta say this the right way. How many people really dislike the disorder model?
It's a deficit model.
Okay, be proud. So quarter to a third of people in the room. There's quite a bit of conversation now in psychological and psychiatric professions about the fact that we may have jumped a few steps too far along this path of diagnosis, looking at especially biochemistry, because it turns out it's way more complicated than that. And when we made these models, it seemed like it was going to be straightforward. It seemed like we would be able to definitively say in a few years that somebody with depression always showed a certain kind of biochemical profile in the brain, for example. And that turns out not to have borne any fruit, not to be true at all. It's just the human animal is too mysterious and too complex to be able to kind of map things out in that way. but we've kind of built structures and structures upon the disorders model, and now we're kind of stuck with it, unfortunately.
The DSM-5 just got printed.
Yes, I know, and there was a huge amount of controversy about the DSM-5. One of the writers of the DSM-2, 3, and 4, and his colleagues got together and said, we should toss this whole thing out. It's bullshit, right? And they had this huge professional debate, well, knife fight about it. So it's a subject of controversy. One of the things I really do like, though, is the new language around spectra. That so many things are a spectrum, and that's really the right way to think about trauma, the right way to think about mental health challenges, and the right way to think about addictions. It's a spectrum. It's not an on or off thing. It's not like we are addicted or not addicted. We're on a spectrum. And that's a more organic and healthy way to think about these matters, it seems to me. Okay. The fact that we live in a society where people are uncomfortable talking about the fact that addictions and mental health challenges are pervasive is a large part of the reason we have this. Gaming, social media, and technology addictions of various kinds. In addition to the fact that these things are free and in your house. And here's something that you should, if you work with parents with kids who are gamers, the worst case scenario is always this. It's always the 15-year-old for whom, okay, so when the kids are born, parents have all the authority. Kids have no authority, no autonomy. Kids get older, parents get older, kids have more autonomy, more independence, more assertion. And by the time they're 9 or 10, when you take them to a restaurant, you let them order on their own, hopefully, right? They order idiotically, but you let them order. They have to practice ordering, right? And then by the time they get to 14 or 15, their amount of autonomy matches yours as a parent. By the time they get to 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, they have more authority than you do. They get to determine what to do with their lives, hopefully. And as you get older and older and older, they have more autonomy, you have less autonomy, and by the time you're 80, you have no autonomy. And they have all the authority, and they will decide how you will spend your twilight years, right? That's straight from the Lion King, right? It's the circle of life, that's how it goes. It's perfect. But the crossing point is age 15. So that's the point where we see the most difficulty with addictions, mental health, trauma, and technology addictions. Because that's the point where kids can say to parents, fuck you, I'm leaving. I'm going to go to my friend's house, right? I'm going to go to the park. So this is the most vulnerable age. And it's the age where kids most need mentors to help guide them through this process. And in the absence of dependable adult mentors, they will almost reliably gravitate toward unhealthy behaviors. So that brings me back to the original point I made, which is that this is the place where we should put in our efforts. This age group here particularly. Okay, marijuana. Okay. I worry about marijuana more than any other substance. Because unlike all the other substances which affect one branch of the nervous system, alcohol affects the fight response. Opiates affect the freeze response. Stimulants affect the orienting response. And what else we have? Alcohol. Alcohol fight response. Oh, I already had alcohol. It's up there. Okay. Hallucinogens. Hallucinogens affect the flight response.
Sorry, could you go through that again?
Yeah. Alcohol affects the fight response.
Okay.
Opiates affect the freeze response, as you'd expect. Stimulants affect the orienting response. And hallucinogens affect the flight response. So each, and these map too, right? So alcohol is related to anger management issues, of course. Opiates and the freeze response are connected to depression. Stimulants and the orienting response are connected to anxiety, because anxiety is free-flowing orienting. And hallucinogens and the flight response are connected to dissociation. Okay? So each of the main mental health challenges we see is hooked in by way of the nervous system to a specific predisposition to a specific kind of addiction that is connected to the way that that addiction deals with or spontaneously and artificially rebalances that branch of the nervous system. So each of the typical substances and behaviors affects one branch, but marijuana affects them all. And that sucks, because it does temporarily make you a more friendly, intelligent, creative, engaging person. And so it creates a kind of artificial self that people really like. It brings you into a nice, lovely balance for an hour or two. But like all the other substances, over time, there's an accumulation of neurological damage. But it's also unique in this way. When you talk to alcoholics, or opiate users, or stimulant users, or hallucinogen users, they all get certain kinds of brain damage, and they're distinctive, right? The kind of brain damage you get from alcohol is different than the kind of brain damage you get from opiates. For example, the kind of brain damage that most alcoholics get over time has to do with memory, like where I parked my car, right? Cognitive map structuring memory kind of things. The kind of brain damage that stimulant users get has to do with impulse control, right? They have these impairments around being able to not get angry, or not get upset, or not get impatient. With cocaine users who are in recovery, that impairment can last for 5–10 years, right? So substance users know when they're in recovery that they damaged their neurology in some way, they have brain damage. And they can articulate their sense of how it is. They're aware of it. So alcoholics will carry a little notebook, where they write down where they park their car. But the marijuana users have a unique kind of brain damage. Marijuana damages the part of your brain that would allow you to notice that you're damaged. Sucks. That's why when you talk to marijuana users, who are obviously like long-term stoners, who are doing nothing with their lives except playing Halo and getting high, when you talk to them about, do you think this is maybe damaging you in your life, they always say no. They say, no way. This is fine. This is great. Everyone should be doing this. And you're like, are you kidding me? And you get exasperated, and they're like, what? Why are you getting so exasperated? Because they're all calm, right? Their nervous system is totally in balance. So they're very empathic toward you when you get exasperated. It's okay. I understand your judgment. I don't have to own the judgment, but I understand it, right? And it's further exasperating you, right? So I worry about this because there's no way in. The other users, they get moments of clarity. Your average alcoholic gets a moment of clarity every couple of months. They wake up in the hospital, they wake up in jail, they wake up at the side of the road, and they're like, holy crap, I better stop this. They don't. And in a way, for the alcoholic, permanent or long-term recovery is really just about accumulating a sufficient number of moments of clarity so one of them sticks. That's the same with a lot of substance users. But if you never get the moment of clarity, then it's hard to have one stick. And marijuana users don't typically get the moment of clarity. And the third thing about it is the marijuana user is the only one who will walk. If you take your average alcoholic or cocaine user or pornography addict or eating disorder, whatever, and you put them in a situation, if you find them in a situation where they're in a relationship with a spouse or a loved one, and that person's getting increasingly upset by the behavior, and eventually they make an ultimatum, which is a really bad idea. But when they make an ultimatum and they say, you have to choose between your addiction and me, right? That never works. But the addicted person typically will say, okay, fine. Okay, I'll go into treatment, or I'll get help, right? They will say something. They can be brought to the table. They won't follow through usually. But they can at least be brought into a real conversation about it. When you do this, when couples do this in the marijuana world, it's usually the wife. I don't mean to be gender stereotypical, but it's always the wife. So she says, I can't stand it anymore. You're not the you I fell in love with, and I don't want to be a user for the rest of my life and be a stoner. And you have to choose between me and your pot. And at that moment, while everyone else says, okay, the marijuana user says, well, if you can't handle it, then you must be the one with the problem. And they walk. I'm like, holy shit. To choose the substance over direct and immediate and honest intimacy is a really deep addiction. And the disconnect between how marijuana users think about their using, which is as a casual, informal sort of thing, And the reality underneath it, which is this kind of erosion over a long term of their cognitive ability and of their ability to really see themselves authentically, that's a real problem. And some of my supervisees who work in treatment centers, they don't know what to do about marijuana. There are no inroads. There don't seem to be any of those little tricks that you pick up in the addictions community around dealing with certain kinds of users or addictions. Marijuana seems somehow inaccessible to those sorts of things. It's not. I mean, people are figuring it out, but it's one that worries me a lot. And we need to educate people more about this particular issue. Like all of the substances, marijuana is healthy in small doses. Don't say that outside of this room. But, you know, everything is healthy in small doses and is medicinal in small doses. I should say something about ayahuasca, too. You want me to say something about ayahuasca?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. They're all medicinal in small quantities. It's when the function of the substance is to artificially modulate the nervous system that we get into trouble. Okay, ayahuasca is being used increasingly now by various people to kind of reset the nervous system in a way that's supposed to be permanent. Ayahuasca is very, very good at resetting the nervous system because it's super powerful. And it will knock you on your ass. I mean, the original function of ayahuasca in the shamanic cultures of South America was to create a kind of artificial death from which you would recover, come back to life, and get on with the rest of your life. It's a very powerful substance. And it will spontaneously rebalance the nervous system for some period of time. But it's not, of course, a magic bullet, because as soon as we get out of that, the aura of the substance and of the community in which we use the substance, we start to drift back toward whatever imbalance the nervous system was carrying with it before we went into the experience. So what happens is we transfer one addiction onto another addiction. And that seems kind of obvious and kind of elementary, and many people have spoken about that danger, but it's absolutely true that any kind of substance, whether it's ayahuasca or something else, any kind of substance that is used to stop the train of addiction, reset the system, and then move us forward will not work. Unless it's paired with a long-term mentorship intervention that lasts for 5 years or so. Because that's how long it takes to retrain the nervous system. It takes 5 years, roughly. And you don't need the reset of substances to do it. You need the reset of community, the reset of mentorship, the reset provided by a legitimate, healthy community. That's the best reset of all, of course. Okay. We go 5 more minutes and give you questions. Okay, addiction to drama and chaos. That is a combination of the nervous system being out of whack in 2 or 3 different ways and cycling like this. Codependency, enabling, spirituality, disconnection, and so on. Okay. And how to start? Since that was a very specific question, how to start?
Can I ask you to you said anxiety is free-floating oriented?
We compare it to addiction, compare it to depression. So depression is freezing, where the nervous system goes into a kind of deep torpor. You lose your gumption, you lose your motivation, you lose your energy, you can't get out of bed, you can't do anything, nothing seems colorful, everything, the color drains out of the world. All the nervous system energy just goes clunk, right? This is the opposite to anxiety, where what you have is too much energy in the nervous system that is flowing around and floating inside of you and unable to be contained. And so it acts out in all these kind of crazy ways that make you crazy, or feel crazy, right, with anxiety. So it is the opposite. So freezing and kind of going inward, it's this kind of movement, is the opposite of this kind of movement, which is about orienting, right? And also the flight response as well. But it's kind of going like this, out there. Orienting, another way to think about orienting is that the extreme version of orienting is hypervigilance. And anxiety is always accompanied by hypervigilance. You become super aware of your surroundings, what's going on, and who's doing what, and it's too much energy, uncontained energy. Okay. Healing new models and starting. Okay, I talked about new models already. Talked about healing already. Starting, let me do starting in spirituality. Okay, so spirituality first. A lot of people in the counseling professions and the helping professions are very interested in spirituality. There are many, many different ways of thinking about what that is in the world today. And many people who have successfully found a path of healing in the addictions world do speak about spirituality as playing a role, whatever they think about that as. In terms of our discussion tonight, we can tie spirituality to balance in the nervous system, to make it really grounded. A sense of equanimity in the nervous system is paired with spiritual experience. When you look at the kind of physiological reactions people have to spiritual experience, what happens in the body is exactly the same as what we see in moments of deep meditation, in moments of deep stillness and openness and connectedness. And all of those moments are accompanied by a perfectly tuned balance of the nervous system. So whether we want to use spirituality language, religious language, ethereal language, or we want to make it really practical and grounded, wherever you fall along that continuum, it really does come down to what happens in the body. And that's the big shift. That's where we should start. We should start thinking about addiction in a way that always includes the body. So treatment programs should always include the body, and most of them do now. Most of the places that I work, they're doing yoga and Tai Chi and going for walks and going to the park and going for swims and going for hikes, and we had a group do the sun run last year and all this kind of stuff, right? I think that's awesome. Pound for pound, dollar for dollar, minute for minute, time spent going for walks together is going to be overall more productive than time spent in a room in a circle talking about feelings. That's useful time. I don't mean to say that's not useful. But if you have to choose between one or the other, go for the walk. The body is the key to rebalancing the nervous system. So that leads to the last thing, which is where we should start. Where we should start is with a bit of detective work in our clients or our family members to help us understand what might be the ways in which the nervous system is out of whack in this person or in ourselves. Where are we stuck? Where are we frozen? Where are we locked into nervous system response patterns that have evolved over a long period? And how could we rebalance them? And you actually don't even have to know what's out of whack. All you have to do is get the body to work in ways that utilize all branches of the nervous system. I'll give you two examples. One I already mentioned, which is running. Running will do it. Right? That's why running is correlated with improvement in depression more than any other thing, including medication and therapy. Just the simple act of running helps with depression for most people more than anything else does. That is awesome and interesting and disturbing for pharmacology business. So it works because of the nervous system association, because of the way it activates in a very deep way the nervous system. So even if we don't know the ways in which the person's nervous system is out of balance, just by having them do an activity like running will help to rebalance it. The other activity that I can think of that does all four is rock climbing. It sounds like an extreme thing, but it does. Hiking, rock climbing, stuff where you're out in nature, where you're doing something that's physically challenging, where you're doing something that has risk attached to it, and the nervous system gets highly activated, and has to keep itself balanced. You need your phone? Yeah. Where the nervous system has to keep itself perfectly balanced in order for you to stay alive. That's good. And so that would lead us to things like canoeing and rafting, and not just the high-risk things, but things that take advantage of the full spectrum of the human animal. That's the solution. The ultimate solution is to rebuild our communities of healing so that they're focused on these kinds of things, as well as on all the other things we already know enough about, like insight work. Okay, questions? Yes?
So when you were talking about things like running and things like that, how is that possible with people with more serious disabilities?
If they can't run, you do something else. Something that allows them to take as much advantage of the physical presence that they have as they possibly can. And that means, I've done work with paraplegics and quadriplegics who obviously can't run, right? And that requires some creativity to think about what can we do that helps them get up and moving or out and moving. And often that work, in my experience, is done in a pool, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isn't it a task though? You know how you need,
Mhm.
you said your time
Yes,
is
you do.
nothing, but Chief said
You need both.
that doing all those things.
Yes, that's a good point.
Right?
So our treatment protocol might involve, let's do as many things as we can to help rebalance the nervous system, and then punctuate those activities with moments of stillness, right? And then we do it again, and we keep going. At the back.
Could you repeat the question so we can hear
what
you're talking about?
I can, absolutely. What's the next question?
When you say community, what are you meaning?
I mean, not Facebook.
You forgot to repeat the question.
Oh yeah, repeat the question. When I say community, what do I mean? Okay, so this is interesting. The research into human community and how many people we should know and how close we can be to people is really cool. A human community cannot function properly with more than 150 people. Okay? So if you have more than 150 Facebook friends or LinkedIn colleagues or whatever it is, right? That's too many. 150 is the maximal number that a human community can function. That's how we evolve. So we're talking about a group that's fairly small by modern standards. And how many people can we love? How many people can we really love, right? It's only like 2-3 people, right? We don't have time for anybody else. In order to really deeply be in intimate relationship with people, it just takes so much time that we only fit in so many people. It's really only 2 or 3 people. So the ideal community has these features. It has a social circle that is no larger than about 150, which is still a lot of people, right? It has a small or intimate circle that has no more than 6. So that's like close friends. And it has an intimate circle that is no larger than about 3. And by intimate, I should say that if the 3, they should be different kinds of relationships. And some research has been done about what is the best kind of one-on-one intimate relationship, and that is interesting. It turns out, of course, it makes sense that we always want to be with someone who is like us, right? And shares our core values and all that kind of stuff, and that's great. But it turns out that kind of sucks for personal development. That what we need is to have the person, so ideally, the other person has, possesses the social skills that we are the worst at, right?
Opposite.
Yeah, they're opposites.
Complementary.
Yeah, or complementary, yeah. And they have, through their sheer annoyance of us, they without making us into their personal project, they push us to grow and change exactly as much as we are capable of growing and changing. And if we get pushed any further than we're capable of moving, we break, right? And that's not good. So it turns out that the kind of person who's ideal to be in a relationship is a person who's annoying most of the time, and is always making us want to be better, and that's really annoying. But it works, and it's the same thing with families, by the way. There's been this whole evolution, as I'm sure you know, about the contrast between quality time and quantity time in families, and it turns out, of course, that the quality time argument really arose out of parents' dissatisfaction with psychological research in the 70s, blaming parents for kids turning out badly. And it's kind of gone back and forth like this. Some recent research was done at Yale about families who eat meals together and the mental health of families, and what kinds of content happened at the family dinner table. And it turns out that it doesn't matter if you get along at the family dinner table. It doesn't matter if the relationships are all happy and harmonious and perfectly modulated, and one person speaks, another person speaks. It doesn't matter, right? I'm happy to hear this. My wife is from a culture where the basic mode of interaction is you yell, and you talk over the other person. And so, there are cultures where people yell and they seem to be fighting all the time. And you stop and you ask them, are you fighting? They say, no. It's weird. But, I come from, Canadian, Scottish background, and, children should be seen and not heard, and one person at a time talks, and all this kind of stuff. And it turns out that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you actually get along. So our focus in relationships on the importance of harmony and of getting along and of being in sync turned out to be just wishful thinking. That the people we should be in a relationship with should be annoying, difficult, conflictual, and push us mercilessly to try to improve. That's tough.
There was a really interesting article in The Atlantic about Paul McCartney and John Lennon, how opposite they were, but how they brought out the best in each other by those contrasts. And
McCartney and Lennon. Okay, question at the back.
Any idea as to how to guide a teenager, right, around 15, you mentioned, or 16, I have one who's 16, in terms of learning how to stay in the moments of stillness? I have a teenager who tells me he's anxious, who tells me he's thinking about using drugs because of that. We luckily have good communication. We tried meditation. After 2 minutes, he says, "No, this is pissing me off. I can't do this. It's making me even worse."
Yeah, go on a road trip in the car, and don't take any devices. Kids, especially young men, they don't often do well with just sitting. It freaks them out even more, right? But the family road trip used to be a major context for self-regulation training for young people, right? You go on a road trip for 15 hours driving to Prince George or whatever it is, and on that trip, a whole bunch of things happen for young people. Now what happens is that the DVD player just drops down from the ceiling of the car and we're done, right? And everybody has their own devices and stuff. And so kids don't get the self-regulation practice they need. One of the best places to do it is in the car. Yeah?
I just read research recently that the best way to talk to teenagers is in the car because teenagers don't like to be looked at.
Yeah, you're looking this way and you can do it. Oh, and don't do it right. Okay, we're talking about boys here. Mostly. I don't want to gender stereotype again, but mostly boys. Don't do it right after school. On the way home. You can't, their nervous system is too amped, and they expect you to ask the leading questions about their day. Don't do it. Give it an hour so they kind of recalibrate and then do it. Works much better.
That's a very good advice. I'm driving him home. Right?
Wait a bit. Okay, question?
Just a couple of comments in the schools and relative to the strike. When we came back from the strike, I could not believe how many of my young men were closer to their moms than they'd ever been. They'd had a really good holiday, and I never hear them say that after just 2 months. But with a month where mom was still back at work but had to take some time, I was amazed at how still they were and ready to go, and that was not what I was expecting. And the other comment is around class size and composition and all that stuff, because the age at which class size goes markedly up. What's the end of grade 3? 8?
Yeah. So
it's precisely when you need the adult mentorship that the class sizes skyrocket up and stay up right through the year.
So the question was about education, the structures in education promoting or corroding this kind of model we're thinking about here. I think one thing is really clear, it's been clear for some time, that the educational system needs to be dismantled entirely and rebuilt from the ground up. And not only the primary and secondary system, but also the post-secondary system. We've known for a long time through mountains of research that what we do is, much of what we do is exactly counterproductive for kids of all ages. And a lot of this has to do with the amount of sitting, the amount of expertness and receptivity on the part of kids, the lack of creativity, the streamlining toward careers too early, all kinds of things happen, right? And many educators are trying to push back against a system that is very deeply fossilized. So that's another place we should be putting our efforts, into the world of education and changing education. This is the educational system over the next decade is going to be fundamentally blown up because of the internet. This gives students, the internet now gives students choices that they did not have before. And kids are going to vote with their feet or with their mouse. And we're already starting to see kids just making different choices. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go and spend a month in some other city and do my coursework there, right? With a group of my friends who want to go because we want to travel there, right? This will become the norm pretty quick. And so educators are being forced now to confront the reality that they no longer control the game. Students control the game now. I think that's good, mostly. Because the other flip side is that students are also idiots because they're kids and they make bad choices. But somewhere between that and educators being in control is the sweet spot, and we'll find it eventually. Okay, one and then last one.
Can you comment briefly on post-grade 12, mostly males, gaming addiction?
Yeah.
So between 17 and 18 and 25,
Yeah.
home, unproductive, not in school, not working?
Yeah, so the question was about the young man syndrome now that we have between 17 and 22, where a lot of these men get stuck and frozen, typically with gaming. They're entering a workforce and a work life that is fundamentally new in human culture. Nobody's ever faced this before. Nobody's ever faced this amount of uncertainty before, this amount of struggle before for young people. It's brand new. And the amount of anxiety and uncertainty can be overwhelming for many, many young people. And they don't know the path forward. The gaming universe provides immensely appealing moments of purposeful activity. You can get together with your friends, go on a quest, achieve it, and learn something. It's not just play. It's purposeful play, and it has meaning for them, and it's highly addictive. You can get the sense in the gaming universe that you're achieving your goals in your life through that medium. And it makes it easier and easier, the more you do that, to stay in that sphere and let the rest of your life just kind of drift along. So it's a moment of that requires deep mentorship, deep and immediate mentorship. My experience is most young men, they age out of it by the time they're 24, 25. Not all do, of course, but many do. They reach this point where they're like, I'm done, right? And that's good. But it is about the fact that they're facing a future that is more difficult than any young people have ever faced before. The world is, think about the world. The world is a mess, an absolute mess. And these people are supposed to fix it. Yes! Okay, last question.
What do you think is the next new addiction or the next new drug?
Virtual reality. No doubt about it. The Oculus Rift and similar technologies that allow us to create a virtual environment that is seamlessly equivalent to the real world, this is going to change the game altogether again. These technologies will allow us not only to create worlds that are imaginatively virtual, like gaming currently does, but to physically step into the space of the game.
Like the Matrix.
Like the Matrix, the holodeck. To virtually step into that space and create worlds that are quite similar to what the nervous system expects to find in the real world. And that is frighteningly addictive. So as we see this stuff come online in the next couple of years, almost all young people who are now addicted to the gaming environments and gaming devices will migrate into that space and become more addicted to it. We need to do something about that proactively. Gaming developers talk about immersiveness. And what they mean when they say immersiveness is addictiveness. And we need to do something about that because this is going to be a massive avalanche. I'm actually quite worried about it because we have done nothing to prepare for this. Okay. So, final thoughts from me, since I got 2 minutes. Pretty much everything I've talked about is online tonight, and you can find it on the website. If you can't find it, send me a note, or look in the search box. It's there somewhere. There's no end of stuff, right? And the refreshing thing about the addictions universe now, to my mind, is that we're moving away from the ghettoization of addiction. The notion that addiction is somehow a different thing, or a frailty that is unique, and that separates it from mental health problems and trauma and other kinds of things we face. For so long we've had this stigma against addictions, that somehow they're the fault of the addicted, right? And now we're moving toward an environment where addictions are seen as part of the continuum of mental health, which is cool. And the entire field of mental health is dropping down from focus on thinking and focus on insight toward focus on the nervous system as the root of all of this stuff. And that absolutely is the magic bullet. Okay, now, how many people in the last hour and a bit have had phantom hip vibration? Anybody? Nobody? How do you feel about surrendering your devices for an hour?
Not good.
Not good?
No.
Not good. Awesome. This continuum of expression and reaction to it is typical of our age, right? We don't know what to do about this stuff. We're in it. And we need to be more mindful about it. And we're trying to be, and that's what we're here tonight. But, okay, as I said, send me a note if you want to talk more about this. Hope you got something useful. Did you get something useful?
Yeah.
All right, thanks for coming.